a platform for students, faculty, and all those who are interested in strengthening the values of academic freedom in Indian educational institutions. So we believe, in the right to access knowledge, to teach, to do research, to enjoy the freedom of expression, movement, and association within and outside educational spaces. And we believe that these rights are best protected under conditions of institutional autonomy. We also, obviously, it's like I said, it's a platform, so we welcome everyone who wishes to share our concerns. If you wish to join us, we have a registration form right outside the auditorium, and it's also available on the website. We have today with us, and I invite all our speakers to the podium. Purvanand, and will all of you sit here? Yeah, I think we have Professor Apurvanand, Anita Rampal, Niladri Bhattacharya, Satish Deshpande, Rashri Chandra, Maya John, and all of us here. We're going to listen to this very distinguished panel of speakers who are with us today to speak on the recent changes in the school textbooks, university curricula, and the syllabi. So, we need one more chair. We'll get the chair. So, I invite you first. I invite Professor Apurvanand first to address the audience. As we all know, he's a professor of Hindi, teaches Hindi at Delhi University, of course, much more than that, and he was part of the core group that designed the National Curriculum Framework for School Education in 2005. Professor Apurvanand was also a member of the National Focus Group on Teaching of Indian Languages formed by the NCERT. He was part of the Yashpal Committee for Renovation and Rejuvenation for Higher Education in India. This is in 2008. So I invite Professor Apurvanand to speak.
शुक्रिया संगमित्रा, आप लोगों को आज की इस बातचीत का संदर्भ मालूम है। हम स्कूली पाठ्यचर्या में या अभी पाठ्यचर्या का जिक्र तो थोड़ा बहुत आएगा, क्योंकि स्कूली किताबों में जो तब्दीलियां की गई हैं उनके संदर्भ में बातचीत करने के लिए इकट्ठा हुए हैं। लेकिन वह चर्चा हो कि वे तब्दीलियां किस तरह की हैं और उनके बारे में हम तुलनात्मक तरीके से चर्चा कर सकें, उसके पहले हमें यह ज़रूरी जान पड़ा कि हम इसकी शुरुआती चर्चा कर लें कि जिन किताबों में अब तब्दीलियां की जा रही हैं या शायद जो किताबें हटाई जाएंगी, उनको लिखे जाने या उनको बनाए जाने का संदर्भ क्या था। मैं बहुत संक्षेप में उसके बारे में बात करना चाहता हूँ। यह 2004 की बात है, जब आम चुनाव हुए और उसमें उन आम चुनावों में एनडीए की सरकार की पराजय हुई और नई सरकार आई, जिसके आप यूपीए की सरकार कहते हैं। एनडीए की सरकार के दौरान, जैसा आप में से कई लोगों को याद होगा और यहाँ बहुत सारे नौजवान बैठे हैं जिनको उस बहस की याद नहीं होगी, लेकिन एनडीए की सरकार के दौरान यह कोशिश की गई थी, ख़ासकर इतिहास की किताबों में, जो इतिहास की किताबें उस वक्त स्कूलों में पढ़ाई जा रही थी, कि उनमें उनका संपादन किया गया, उनमें कई तरह की तब्दीलियां की गईं और सन 2000 में स्कूली पाठ्यचर्या लागू की गई। उस स्कूली पाठ्यचर्या को लेकर एक लंबी बहस चली और आपको यह भी याद होगा कि सर्वोच्च न्यायालय में एक मुकदमा भी दायर किया गया, जो अरुणा रॉय और दूसरे लोगों ने दायर किया था। उस मुकदमे के विस्तार में मैं नहीं जा रहा हूँ, लेकिन अरुणा रॉय का तर्क यह था कि यह पूरी प्रक्रिया संघीय नियमों का उल्लंघन करते हुए की गई है, यानी फेडरल प्रिंसिपल्स को वायलेट करते हुए की गई है, क्योंकि इसमें केब की राय नहीं ली गई है, सेंट्रल एडवाइजरी बोर्ड ऑफ एजुकेशन की राय नहीं ली गई है। लेकिन सर्वोच्च न्यायालय ने ऐसा महसूस किया कि यह अनिवार्य नहीं है और सरकार ऐसा कर सकती है। यह ध्यान रखना हम लोगों के लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है कि जो नेशनल करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क बनता है वह नेशनल करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क राज्यों के लिए अनिवार्य नहीं है, क्योंकि शिक्षा कॉन्करेंट लिस्ट पर है और इसलिए राज्य चाहें तो अपनी पाठ्यक्रम पाठ्यचर्या बना सकते हैं, अपनी किताबें भी बना सकते हैं। लेकिन आमतौर पर होता यह है कि एनसीईआरटी के नेतृत्व में जो करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क बनता है या किताबें बनती हैं, उनका रुआब इतना ज़्यादा रहता है, और वह इसलिए भी कि सीबीएसई के स्कूल उन किताबों का इस्तेमाल करते हैं कि प्रायः अगर शुरुआती कक्षाओं में नहीं भी तो 10वीं, 11वीं, 12वीं में एनसीईआरटी की किताबें ही लगभग सारे राज्य इस्तेमाल करते हैं। इसलिए एनसीईआरटी की किताबों का बहुत महत्व है। अब वह एक अलग बहस है कि क्यों राज्य अपनी एससीईआरटीज़ की कैपेसिटी बिल्ड नहीं करते हैं और ख़ुद क्यों किताबें नहीं लिखवाते हैं, इस पर अलग चर्चा हो सकती है। लेकिन इस वजह से एनसीईआरटी के नेशनल करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क का और एनसीईआरटी की किताबों का राष्ट्रीय महत्व है। और इसी कारण सन 2000 के स्कूली पाठ्यचर्या पर बहस हुई, जिस और फिर मैं उस पूरी बहस में नहीं जा रहा हूँ, और उसकी आलोचना की गई। उसके बाद 2004 में नई सरकार आई, और जब नई सरकार आई तो शिक्षा जगत से यह मांग उठी, दो शब्दों का इस्तेमाल किया गया अंग्रेजी में। यह कहा गया कि लेट अस डीसैफ्रनाइज एंड लेट अस डिटॉक्सिफाई टेक्स्ट बुक्स एंड डीसैफ्रनाइज टेक्स्ट बुक्स, यह मांग की गई। और इससे फिर एक संदेह पैदा हुआ कि यह आखिरकार एक विचारधारात्मक लड़ाई है, दो विचारधारात्मक समूहों के बीच संघर्ष हो रहा है, और एक विचारधारात्मक समूह अभी पराजित हो गया है तो दूसरा अब कह रहा है कि उसकी सारी बातों को निकाल दो। लेकिन जो दिलचस्प बात हुई वह यह कि जब नए पाठ्यचर्या बनाने का मसला आया तो तत्कालीन सरकार ने, उस वक्त की सरकार ने एनसीईआरटी को एक सुझाव दिया, और वह सुझाव यह था कि आप नई पाठ्यचर्या या नई किताबों को बनाने के लिए जो संदर्भ बिंदु बनाएंगे वह संदर्भ बिंदु होगा 1992-93 की यशपाल कमेटी रिपोर्ट ऑन लर्निंग विदाउट बर्डन, जिसका मतलब यह था कि यह मसला डिसैफ्रनाइजेशन का नहीं है, यह मसला डिटॉक्सिफिकेशन का नहीं है, इसका जो भी माने हों, बल्कि मसला है कि आप पूरी स्कूल को कॉन्सेप्चुलाइज कैसे कर रहे हैं, करिकुलम की परिकल्पना कैसे कर रहे हैं और किताबों की परिकल्पना कैसे कर रहे हैं, जिससे सीखने और सिखाने के जो सिद्धांत 1992-93 के डॉक्यूमेंट में यशपाल कमेटी ने प्रस्तावित किए थे, उन सिद्धांतों के आधार पर काम किया जा सके। इसको ध्यान रखना बहुत आवश्यक है, और यह इसलिए आवश्यक है कि अभी जब यह बहस शुरू हुई फिर से, तब यह कहा गया कि भाई हर सरकार आती है और हर सरकार अपने मुताबिक किताबें बनाती है, तो इसमें क्या ख़ास बात है। पहले भी कांग्रेस की सरकार आई थी, उसने अपने मुताबिक किया था। लेकिन हम ये भूल जाते हैं कि 2004-05 में एक बहुत ही नई चीज़ हुई थी स्कूली शिक्षा में, जिसके बारे में लोग सोचते नहीं हैं, और वो नई चीज़ यह थी कि पहली बार शिक्षा शास्त्रीय सिद्धांतों को सामने रखा गया था, और यह कहा गया था कि आपको जिस बात को केंद्र में रखना है वो पेडागॉजिक प्रिंसिपल्स हैं, और उसके आधार पर पूरे करिकुलम को डिज़ाइन करना है और पाठ्य पुस्तकों को डिज़ाइन करना है। और यह बहस इसलिए दक्षिणपंथ और वामपंथ की बहस नहीं थी, यह बहस थी कि स्कूली शिक्षा में जो पूरी दुनिया में सबसे नए शोध हुए हैं, जिनके आधार पर हम समझ सकते हैं कि विज्ञान की पढ़ाई कैसे होगी, या समाज विज्ञान की पढ़ाई कैसे होगी, या गणित की पढ़ाई कैसे होगी, या भाषा की पढ़ाई कैसे होगी, उन सबसे नए सिद्धांतों के आधार पर हम क्या पाठ्यचर्या का निर्माण कर सकते हैं। और यह एक बहुत लंबी प्रक्रिया चली। इस प्रक्रिया की एक पृष्ठभूमि थी, ऐसा नहीं है कि यह कोई आसमान से टपक पड़ी थी। भारतवर्ष में इसके प्रयोग हुए थे। अगर इसके पहले आप होशंगाबाद साइंस प्रोजेक्ट के प्रयोगों को देख लें, एकलव्य के प्रयोगों को देख लें जो मध्य प्रदेश में किए गए थे, स्कूली शिक्षा को लेकर और किताबों को लेकर, वे प्रयोग पृष्ठभूमि में थे। और उन प्रयोगों की पृष्ठभूमि के आधार पर सन 2000 के बाद दिल्ली सरकार ने SCRT के माध्यम से नई किताबें बनवाई थीं। उन किताबों को बनाने वालों में कुछ लोग यहाँ मौजूद हैं। वो नई किताबें बनाई गई थीं और उनमें भी सिद्धांत वही लिया गया था। तो इसलिए यह नहीं है कि 2004-05 बिल्कुल ही कोई नई चीज़ हो रही थी। जैसा मैंने कहा कि होशंगाबाद साइंस प्रोजेक्ट को आप देख लें और उस आंदोलन को देख लें, एकलव्य को देख लें, उन्होंने जो प्रयोग किए थे उन सबको ध्यान में रखा गया। और फिर एक लंबी विचार विमर्श की प्रक्रिया चलाई गई, जिसमें यह ध्यान दिया गया कि आप जब किताबें आप जब करिकुलम बनाएंगे या सिलेबस बनाएंगे, और वह एक पूरा क्रम था, और उस क्रम को भी ध्यान में रखना ज़रूरी है क्योंकि हमारे ध्यान में सबसे पहले सिर्फ किताबें आती हैं। हम करिकुलम की बात नहीं करते, हम सिलेबस की बात नहीं करते। लेकिन 2004-05 में NCERT ने कहा कि हम पहले करिकुलम बनाएंगे, फिर हम सिलेबस बनाएंगे और फिर हम किताबों की तरफ जाएंगे। तो किताबें करिकुलम का एक हिस्सा हैं। किताबें एकमात्र चीज़ नहीं है जिन पर स्कूलों को ध्यान देना चाहिए। किताबें उस पूरे करिकुलम के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में अपनी मीनिंग हासिल करती हैं या अपने मायने हासिल करती हैं। तो वह प्रक्रिया बहुत लंबी थी, मैं उसके भी विस्तार में नहीं जाऊंगा, लेकिन उसका महत्व इसलिए है कि उसमें हज़ारों हज़ार शिक्षक, जो स्कूली शिक्षक थे, जो कॉलेज यूनिवर्सिटीज़ के शिक्षक थे, उसके अलावा जिनकी शिक्षा में रुचि थी और जो कॉलेज और स्कूल से अलग शिक्षा का काम कर रहे थे, जैसे एकलव्य या और इस तरह के हज़ारों संगठन, सैकड़ों संगठन पूरे भारत में हैं। यह प्रयास किया गया कि उन तमाम संगठनों से, उन तमाम लोगों से को जोड़ा जाए इस पूरी प्रक्रिया में। और यह प्रक्रिया कई महीनों तक चलती रही और इस प्रक्रिया के परिणाम स्वरूप नेशनल करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क का निर्माण हुआ। वो दस्तावेज़ लिखा गया। 21 अगर मुझे पूरी तरह से याद है 21 फोकस ग्रुप पेपर्स लिखे गए। सिर्फ उदाहरण के लिए मैं बताना चाहता हूँ कि कुछ नेशनल फोकस ग्रुप पेपर्स थे, जैसे कुछ ऐसी चिंताएं होंगी जो हर विषय में जाएंगी, मसलन डिसेबिलिटी का सवाल या मसलन जेंडर का सवाल, मसलन जाति का प्रश्न। ये इसको सिर्फ समाजशास्त्र की किताब एड्रेस नहीं करेगी, बल्कि यह गणित के लिए भी महत्वपूर्ण है, ये भाषा के लिए भी महत्वपूर्ण है, ये विज्ञान के लिए भी महत्वपूर्ण है। इसलिए ये कंसर्न्स थे जिनको लेकर फोकस ग्रुप बने कि आप उनको कैसे बुनेंगे किताबों में या पूरे करिकुलम में। और फिर यह चिंता भी थी कि जिन्हें आप डिसिप्लिन्स कहते हैं, जैसे गणित है या भाषा है या विज्ञान है, इनको आप कैसे पढ़ाएंगे। इसलिए फोकस ग्रुप भाषा पर फोकस ग्रुप था, गणित पर फोकस ग्रुप था, दूसरे फोकस ग्रुप्स थे। तो इन सारे फोकस ग्रुप्स को लेकर और उनको समावेशित करके नेशनल करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क के डॉक्यूमेंट का निर्माण किया गया। फिर अलग अलग विषयों के सिलेबस बने और फिर किताबें बनी। और उन किताबों को बनाने में भी और ये मैं आखिरी बात है जो कह के ख़त्म करना चाहता हूँ कि उन किताबों को बनाने में भी पहले जो किताबें बनी थीं, अगर सिर्फ आप इतिहास का ही ध्यान कर लें, इतिहास की किताबों का, तो एक एक लेखक एक एक किताब लिख रहा था, है ना। रोमिला थापर की किताब थी, राम शरण शर्मा की किताब थी, इरफान हबीब की किताब थी। लेकिन इस बार जब ये प्रक्रिया चली तो समाजशास्त्र की किताब हो या इतिहास की किताब हो या और की किताब हो, तो एक पूरा समूह था जिसमें इतिहास, जो यूनिवर्सिटी के प्रोफेसर्स हैं या इतिहासकार हैं वे शामिल थे, लेकिन स्कूल के शिक्षक शामिल थे और इन सब से बाहर भी लोग शामिल थे। और पॉलिटिकल लाइफ की किताबें हैं, उसके लेखकों की या उसके समूह की सूची देखेंगे, इतिहास की, तो आप ये नहीं कह सकते हैं कि ये सब सिर्फ एक तरह से सोचने वाले लोग हैं। ये एक ही समस्या को अलग अलग तरह से सोचने वाले लोग थे, जो साथ बैठकर कोशिश कर रहे थे कि क्या हम एक ऐसी किताब बना सकते हैं जिनमें छात्रों की रुचि होगी, और जो उनमें, जैसा प्रोफेसर यशपाल ने अपने 1992-93 के डॉक्यूमेंट में कहा था, और उसके बाद जो उनका एक नारा था वो ये है कि क्या हम विद्यार्थियों में समझ का चस्का लगा सकते हैं। तो सिर्फ सूचनाओं से ठूंस देना, एक सूचना महत्वपूर्ण है या दूसरी सूचना महत्वपूर्ण है, इस फिक्र से आज़ाद होकर क्या हम इतिहास की समझ का चस्का लगा सकते हैं, समाज विज्ञान की समझ का चस्का लगा सकते हैं, गणित के समझ का चस्का लगा सकते हैं। यह महत्वाकांक्षा थी। इस महत्वाकांक्षा के तहत ये किताबें लिखी गई थीं, और अब इन किताबों में तब्दीली हो रही है, जिसके बारे में बात आगे होगी। मेरा काम सिर्फ यह संदर्भ आपके सामने रख देना था, क्योंकि हम चर्चा शुरू जब करते हैं तो कहते हैं हाँ, पिछली सरकारों ने अपने अनुसार किया, यह सरकार अपने अनुसार कर रही है, इसको भी अधिकार है। हमारा कहना नहीं, वो पिछली सरकार नहीं कर रही थी, वो शिक्षाविद कर रहे थे, और वो एक पूरा सिद्धांत था। जब तक आप उस सिद्धांत के विरुद्ध कोई ऐसा सिद्धांत नहीं ला देते हैं जिसको आप साबित कर सकें कि बेहतर है शिक्षा शास्त्रीय सिद्धांत, तब तक आप सिर्फ यह कह के कि पिछली सरकार ने किया तो इस सरकार को भी अधिकार है यह करने का, इतने हल्के ढंग से इस बहस को नहीं चला सकते हैं। बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया।
Thank you, Purvanand. The next speaker we have is Professor Anita Rampal, who was a professor and dean in the Faculty of Education in Delhi University. She was also been involved in the National Curriculum Framework of 2005, which we just heard about from Professor Purvanand. Professor Rampal was also the chairperson of the NCERT Primary Textbooks Development Team. And currently, she's a member of the core committee for curriculum revision in Kerala, with the Kerala government. Thank you.
Thank you. सभी साथियों को नमस्कार। इसी बात को आगे बढ़ाते हुए जो अपूर्वानंद ने रखा है कि क्या पृष्ठभूमि थी जिसमें ये काम चल रहा था, I'd like to take this idea of NCF, but I'd then like to look at the science textbooks, the science curriculum, and the curriculum framework now. What is it telling us about these disciplines? I bring before us perspectives from science studies, which is something that I have worked on and taught even at the master's or PhD level, and which was always in our mind because when we were part of the science syllabus committee, on the one hand, as Apurvanand has said, that NCF had placed before us a critical perspective of education, critical pedagogy, which means that inspired by Freire, which means that we look at issues of justice and injustice, justice and inequality, and we look at also understanding diversity and disparity. So it's not just diversity and sort of celebrating diversity, but understanding with very young children also. These are issues that you can look at because these are part of their lives. And social constructivism, which is that a learner doesn't learn alone. How we learn is part of a social process, which means how we interact with others, either our age or with adults or different people outside in the world, and how even a doubt or how a question can make us think, and our learning collectively is much better than what any one of us would have done individually. So this was also how do we write a syllabus? How do we write books which actually interact with the learner? Which are not just telling the learner you're sitting and reading it alone and you're a learner alone, you know, whether you're staring at a board or at a screen or at your phone. So how do you break that process of pedagogy also? So how do you write and how do you think of a curriculum or a syllabus which is in consonance with that? So in terms of the science studies perspective, because we are short of time, I'll just put a few points before you, because this is what we kept in mind, not as if we could bring everything. In fact, in the science syllabus committee, I was telling some of our friends and remembering that we had some of the major sort of resistances and subversions. हम एक दिन बैठते थे और एक सिलेबस का ढांचा बनता था और जब अगली मीटिंग पे आते थे तो वो ढांचा ही पूरी तरह बदल दिया जाता था by people who thought that they'd been doing this for so many years, including people at NCRT feeling very uncomfortable about making changes. So there is an inertia within the system itself. It's not just teachers who are often blamed that they don't understand how things have changed, but it is people who've been writing syllabi who themselves have to shake themselves out of a certain inertia because we think we've been doing it for decades, what's new? The same children, the same disciplines, everything is the same. So science and math for equity and democracy, what does it mean? What kinds of science and math are for all? Because normally science and maths are considered for the talented, for some, for the few. You know, everyone says, I can't deal with numbers, and we say it quite sort of frankly because we think that, you know, it's something that you can say and it's acceptable. It's only some people who can do it. So how do you actually plan for a different kind of science? Because after all, what comes in the textbook or in a syllabus has not come from the top somewhere. It's what has evolved. And over centuries, or 100 years or 150 years, when we look at the history of how curricula have evolved, you see the changes, you see what is happening, how we have developed that, and they don't always necessarily reflect the discipline, how science might be happening in the field, or any other subject, how history or geography or anything might be happening. So to understand that, keep that in mind, how do we design a different science and maths curriculum, which is not an abstract, not acultural, not decontextualized, कि कोई संदर्भ की ज़रूरत नहीं है, सब जगह universal है, कहीं भी बात कर लो, science तो वही है, numbers तो वही है, no, not that. Not dehumanized, कि आपको सिर्फ हाथ दिखते हैं और textbook दिखती है, पूरा शरीर भी देखने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. So it's not that, and also it's not to serve as gatekeepers for higher education or professional education. कोई भी एग्जाम देना है तो आपको एक ये aptitude test या आपको some kind of mathematics test देना ही होगा. Or these subjects then become what decide what you can do in higher education. Not that kind of a discipline. It is located, the subjects themselves, not the education, not the curriculum, the subjects themselves are located in historical, socio-cultural contexts, and that is something that I have been devising courses for, even for teachers, because it's so important for us to look at that. And then science-technology society interface, what does that mean? Often science is not acknowledged and that it draws upon indigenous, artisanal, and people's knowledge traditions. It does not happen, so we look at history. How is it that Galileo was actually looking at mechanics and what they were doing and how they were designing these, the cannons and the, how the guns and the cannons were being designed, and he was trying to understand what is projectile motion because they knew it. There was no theory for that. So often this thing about technology being an application of science is a myth. That's not true. Technologies come earlier. They come made by people who are not scientists or not even probably literate. So what are these relationships, even within this area, is something that we thought we'll keep in mind even when we are writing these textbooks. And a critical look at colonial voyages of discovery, because a lot of the knowledge, we're talking of Darwin, and I will talk about how Darwin has been pushed out of the textbook, but what does it mean? And whose knowledges were these? And the global south, issues of ecological debt, and the current scientist movements for knowledge commons, and the fact that the people, the planet, and a pluriverse is something that people are talking about. So I've just sort of rattled off some of these ideas which are obviously part of a larger field, but do we keep this in mind when we're thinking of a science curriculum for school right from the early ages to class 12? There were major resistances at the high level, as you can understand. All our entrance tests, everything is geared to that. And people from the universities came in and were actually then subverting many of these ideas. You don't need this. I mean, I remember someone from the university came and said, you have to teach valency at class 6. Why? They don't even know the learner, they don't know how children learn, what are the processes, what kind of learners we're dealing with, and they only are bothered about valency being taught in class 6. So that is the way syllabi are made. And how is it that you work against these pressures is what the challenge was. EVS and environmental studies, why I'm focusing on this is because I'm shocked to read in the National Curriculum Framework that this is thrown out. There is nothing called environmental studies now. I'm shocked to read the case that NCF makes to throw this out, the kind of strange logic that is being given as to why children can understand concepts only in middle school. After age 11, they start thinking about concepts. I mean, they are designing a new theory of concept development, which we have never heard of, never taught, and that is very problematic in the NCF. So the EVS that we worked on was the first attempt and probably the only attempt in the entire curriculum to actually make an interdisciplinary curriculum. Our National Curriculum Framework now talks about this word, and that's the most often used word probably in the whole curriculum framework, but this is easier said than done, and no one understands it. But the NCF is opposing, is giving you a logic of why it doesn't work, and why teachers are either coming from science or social studies and putting the whole burden, the onus on the teachers, so they can't teach EVS. Because it's an integrated, it's supposed to integrate primary science, social studies, and environment education for the first time for children in children age 8 to 11, so roughly grade 3, 4, 5 is what we were working on. And we said that integration is not possible if all these disciplines sit down and say, these topics have to go. Like I told you, we had chemists telling us that valency has to go at this age, period. So we can't do these topics. So we only will look at themes and thematically try and build around them and see which are those themes, simple themes, water, food, shelter, work, anything like that, and which allow you to then look across these disciplines and make meaningful connections. So we did that, and a new format we developed, which I notice is being now proposed, but the format was that we start not with topics, we start with key questions in a language that is almost like the language of a child, without jargon, to actually tell the textbook writer and the teacher and the curriculum developer that this is where we peg it. Because till now, our system used to have a syllabus called, which would say solar system. What about the solar system? I mean, it would say solar system at class 4, and then it would say solar system at masters. What do you do with it? So we said, no, this will not work. How do you write a syllabus? So we started with key questions, and I'll just give you a little example of the key questions. Which of the following is food, or which is not food? So not starting with carbohydrates, proteins, etc., but what is food? Because that is the kind of socialization that one needs to really address. We all think we know what food is, and that is not food. That, and then to sensitize them about this, who produces the food we eat? And farmers, what is it that, what kind of land do they have? Do they all have land? Narratives of children missing school when they have to go with their parents who are farmers, and seasonal migration. Plants come from far off, can come from other countries. And so songs from our own magazine Chakmak, Aloo Mirchi Chai Ji, Kaun Kahan Se Aaye Ji. Just thinking about what is it that we are saying about our food and Indian traditions, etc., etc. But chai bhi nahi thi, aloo bhi nahi tha, kya khate the, kya peete the, etc. And humanistic histories of science. Again, not just information, but story of the stomach, how the first time people came to know that what is this, what happens to the food inside the stomach, how does it digest it. The NEP now gives a new structure to the school, which is very, very problematic. I won't be able to go into the details, but the foundational stage is dumbing down. It only says, which is age 3 to 8, which is 3 years of Anganwadi, 2 years of primary school, and which says only foundational literacy and numeracy. We have a well-established area which is called early language and mathematics. Why do we have to call it literacy and numeracy? And then, as I said, children develop concepts even before they start speaking. In fact, they speak when they look at something that walks and they call it bhau bhau. This is a concept. This is a concept. Am I touching this? Oh gosh. This is a concept that has been made in their mind, and that is what they're seeing similarities and categorizing something which they call a bhau bhau. So to say that concepts develop only in middle school is really a travesty of understanding children. How much time do I have? Okay. So this is one thing that one has to be very careful of, because the whole justification is that, as I said, teachers are unable to drive discussions about interdisciplinary, about EVS. That's why it's out. Activities are done in isolation, and a major issue is that societal practices and observations are often opposite of what is taught and discussed in schools. How nice. The NCF is telling us. This defeats the basic purpose of this subject. So EVS has been really is under fire. And if teachers are not reflected, then these practices can contradict what is in the textbook, so throw it out, throw out the whole subject. Children don't need primary science in any case, or primary social studies. And now, similar thing happening in grade 9, 10, 11, 12, which is being called secondary stage. So we know how our children are struggling with five subjects or 6 subjects, a board exam, dealing with it, no teachers, you know what they're doing, we know that. And now there are going to be 16 subjects, both at 9, 10 and 16 subjects in 11, 12. But there is a catch. It's being called the student choice-based curriculum for 11th and 12th, because 10th you don't have choice, they're all compulsory, including an area called interdisciplinary area, which is a gray area. Because a lot of things like knowledge of India, Indian knowledge systems, traditions, practices, etc., 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 is coming in there. And it is compulsory, and then we know how it's also throwing out a very well-recognized program of our university called the Bachelor of Elementary Education. It says that, you know, now this is an old program, and these were teachers who for 4 years tried to understand all these issues which they say teachers don't understand, how you teach an interdisciplinary course, or how you understand societal practices, how you understand caste or religion, and you know, things like that. And now they're bringing in an ITEP, an integrated 4-year course, which from the first year onwards, the only education it does is the evolution of Indian education. We used to talk of modern Indian education. It talks of evolution of Indian education, even though it throws out Darwin and evolution otherwise. But evolution of Indian education, and it is talking about the Indian ethos, understanding the Indian ethos, Indian knowledge systems. All this is going in the first year. Policy analysis, which we used to do right at the beginning, I've always taught it, I've always developed those courses, comes in the 8th semester, fag end of the course. So we can see, even though we don't have the entire course before us, and Delhi University has been struggling to stop it from being stopped, but this is what we can see. These are the erasures, these are the revisions which are all connected. What comes as a policy comes in the NCF, comes in our Delhi University, comes in the teacher education course. But the problem with the secondary courses is that in 11th and 12th, which middle class seems to be feeling happy because they can choose one discipline in sciences, another discipline in arts or something else, but this will only be obviously for an elite section. This will only be for some schools which have all these teachers. In most other schools, it says that we know that there won't be enough teachers, and so there should be, for students to have a reasonable choice, we must offer at least one curricular area from each of the following categories, and this is a catch. In 11th, 12th, the category 1 is all the so-called academic subjects. So humanities, social science, science or mathematics, they all come in category 1. Category 2 is interdisciplinary areas. So at least something has to be offered from here. And category 3 is arts, sports, or other courses like this. So many schools now can run 11th, 12th with doing only one language course, language as a discipline, and 4 courses in language, and then one interdisciplinary area, which can be Indian knowledge systems, or it can be home science, or something like that, and then one arts. And you can do your 11th, 12th, which earlier schools affiliated under any of these boards could not offer. So this is a catch that we see. And I want to say that from what the initial discussion that I had presented in terms of perspectives on science, we have looked at and we have brought in, even in our textbooks where possible, ideas of artisanal, indigenous science, ideas of civilizational sharing and exchanging of knowledge and other things. And that this Indian knowledge system with an M, not an S, is something that we know a lot of obscurantist ideas, a lot of pseudoscience, and a lot of other questionable things are coming in because we have seen what happened in Karnataka. All the 25 position papers Karnataka made were extremely dubious and problematic because they talked of strange things, which all can come under that. And the last point on deletions, I will not go into. I mean, there are deletions on environmental degradation, there are deletions on renewable energy sources, all that, but Darwin and evolution, it's ironical that in COVID-19, when everyone said that it was important to understand how viruses sort of come, they appear, what natural selection and mutations happens, to understand what was happening around us, this entire thing, in fact, the chapter is called diversity and heredity. So heredity was kept, but diversity was thrown out. And for the first time in our country, 3 of our national science academies came together and they wrote and protested against this. That was quite an amazing thing. Scientists normally don't speak in public. I mean, I'm trained as a scientist, but I know that for the first time we had these statements which also said that there is no scientific dispute about the basic facts of evolution. This is a scientific theory and one that has made predictions and repeatedly confirmed by experiments and observations. It would be a retrograde step to remove the teaching of the theory of evolution from school and college, or to dilute this by offering non-scientific explanations or myths. A science academy saying this is quite a major thing. So we can see how serious it was. And they even said that in the context of revivalism and a return to Indian knowledge systems, what is happening to funding agencies like Department of Science and Technology, Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, which support research on some topics which, under the ancient science banner, they talk about cow urine or cow dung or medical astrology, etc., this is going to be an extremely dangerous step. And I'll close here because our constitution, if we remember, talks about develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. It's interesting that all of it comes under one section. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, Professor Niladri Bhattacharya, who was a professor at the Center for Historical Studies, JNU, and is currently a visiting professor at Ashoka University. Professor Bhattacharya was also the chief advisor of NCERT's Textbook Development Committee, which was formed for the National Curriculum Framework of 2005. I invite Niladri.
I'll say a bit about how the textbooks were visualized when we took up the charge of writing these new textbooks. Then I'll talk very briefly about what the changes are at the present and make a few comments in the end about how we can visualize new textbooks in future. When we were given the responsibility of writing the new textbooks, devising the syllabus, a small group, 5, 6 of us, met for a year to think about the syllabus at the time. Our charge was exciting as well as challenging, because for many of us, me, Kumkum, Subramaniam, we were becoming part of a process which had to, in a certain sense, displace the earlier textbooks which were written by our teachers. Ramila Thapa, Bipin Chandra, Satish Chandra, R.S. Sharma, iconic figures of who had dominated the field of history from the 60s onwards, 60s, 70s, and 80s, when they wrote these textbooks. They were some of the finest minds of the time, and the textbooks they produced were wonderful. We had all read the textbooks, but it was a time that we thought these textbooks the school textbooks needed to change. The primary reason for that is that in the 30 years that those early 30 years before, they were written 30 years before, and in these 30 years, the field of history had changed. Feminist historians had made us aware of the fact that gender matters in history, and we have to be gender sensitive. Ecological historians had made us sensitive to ecological issues and made us aware that development, change, industrialization, growth, improvement, all have ecological implications. Cultural history, history of everyday life, history of sport, history of spaces, history of landscape, history of cartography, all these things had become part of the historians' concerns in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And in India, historians were writing about all these themes, exploring new fields. So very clearly, these were themes that in some way, we had to integrate within school textbooks, not in academic forms, but make students sensitive to questions of ecology, questions of everyday life, questions of culture, questions of environment. And more than that, the overall shift which had taken place from the 50s, 60s, and 70s is the shift from dynastic histories, political and economic histories, also to histories of the marginals, histories of the Dalits, histories of artisans, weavers, other communities, histories of aboriginals in Australia or America or New Zealand. All these have become important in the study of history. So this made our task challenging, that we had to think of all this as part of history, and we had to displace books which we all valued. Very clearly, our teachers were both anxious, a bit upset, but also proud that we were all part of a new process of rewriting, of reworking of history, rethinking about history. We met for a year in 2004 and 5, 5 or 6 of us, Narayani Gupta, Professor Narayani Gupta from Jamia, Professor Kumkum Roy from JNU, Subramaniam from Ekalavya, Srinivasan from Chitra Srinivas from SPV, and myself. We talked about the structure of syllabus, how we could change, what were the new challenges, how we could innovate, how we could integrate all this, and what are the pedagogical issues that we had to be concerned with, be sensitive to. Once we rethought the structure of the syllabus, this had to go back to a wider committee, which was set up, which included journalists, NGOs, professors, teachers, and others. And there was heated debate over the syllabus, what should be included, what should not be included. And of course, there were resistance, as was talked about by resistance in the history of science, history of maths, but also resistance in writing the history of reworking the syllabus of history. One of the strongest debate I remember having was with my close friend Praful Vidwai, who was resistant to a lot of the changes that we were wanting to make. So we had to argue all that case. And after that began the process of selecting the individuals who'd write this text, then reading through the first drafts, debating and discussing and changing them. And over 4, 5, 6 months, we constantly met every month to debate these drafts over time. And there were teachers, there were NGO activists, there were educationists, and there were professors who were part of all these discussions. The point I'm trying to make is that the textbooks and syllabus revision has to be through a dialogic process of intense debate and discussion, which takes into account new advances, new changes, new insights, but also is sensitive to questions of pedagogy. How things can be presented in schools, what can be taught, how it can be taught, what can be integrated, what cannot be integrated. So these are issues which we were discussing, and it was a learning process. A lot of people, Anita to others, made us sensitive to many of these pedagogic issues. And I would like to try and suggest that how those issues are issues which we had to think of in working out the chapters, their structure, their themes, as well as the questions, the exercises, the boxes, the sources, everything. 5 or 6 issues and points that we had to be sensitive to and which we were trying to integrate. The first question was to discuss what is it that is worth knowing. If we have to expand the vision of history, what should be the nature of that expansion? And in discussing that, the first point which was clear is that we needed to write a history which incorporated the lives of the wider sections of people. Our seniors, our teachers and the historians of the 60s and 70s had already moved away from dynastic and political history of kings and queens to the history of peasants and masses in a certain sense in the, when they're focusing on social and economic history. But what about other social groups? The forest dwellers and pastoralists, the tribals and the weavers, a whole range of communities, the Dalits and others whose history was not yet written. They were not yet integrated within school textbooks. So we thought about incorporating all the histories of variety of these plebeian, marginal groups whose history we felt should be part of school textbooks. So we have the chapters on forest dwellers, on tribals, on weavers, on iron smelters, on pastoralists, a whole range of social groups who are in some way seen as part of that marginal section who were not incorporated in earlier frames of history. Secondly, we asked, why should history be only about politics and economy? Why not about everyday life? We wanted students to be aware that everything around us has a history. The clothes we wear, the food we eat, the colors we like or dislike, the houses we stay in, everything, the sports we play, the print culture, the texts, the novels, the fiction that we read, everything has a history. And these histories are intimately connected to development and change within society, and they're intimately connected to the modern world, the coming into being of the modern world. And histories of sport and everyday life, and histories of food, and histories of clothing, and this had become part of historians' concern over the 30, 40 years that I'm talking about, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Histories of leisure, histories of games, histories of sport. So we integrated some of them to have chapters on history of sport, on history of clothing, on history of the novel, on the history of print culture. So these are a way of integrating, in some sense, those themes which were not seen earlier as the object of historians' concern. And they come in class 9 and 10 in many different ways. In class 9 and 10, we divide the structure into a focus of 3 chapters on the political, 2-3 chapters on the economic social groups and economic change, and 2 chapters in both these classes on everyday life. Third, we wanted to go beyond Eurocentric concerns. From the 80s, we had become critical, historians had become critical of the Eurocentricism of history writing. The fact that everything we discuss and write about is always with reference to Europe. Europe is the center, development happens there first, and then it is emulated elsewhere. Other countries follow European patterns. So to understand industrialization in India, you have to refer back to the classic form in England or Europe. To understand agrarian development, you again have to refer back to to understand the so-called Renaissance in Bengal, you have to refer to Renaissance in England. So this had been critiqued very widely. So we wanted to decenter that history, which was the language within which academics talked about. But how do we do it? We felt that it can be done both in terms of structure, but also in terms of writing. In terms of writing, what we had devised is that first 3 years, 6, 7, 8, they do a focus on Indian history only. In 9 and 10, we devised 2 books on India and the contemporary world to make the point that India, as well as Africa or Indonesia or other parts of the world, were all part of the making of the modern world. So we moved from India to, in each chapter, we were moving from one region. India was always there, from India to other parts of the world. And therefore, understand how we all together, different countries, different peoples, different populations, all their activities together, their histories together are part of that making of that contemporary world. So that's how India in the contemporary world, we broke away from a chronological history to a thematic history where this point about collective making of history, the connected history of different countries was being emphasized. Within each chapter, of course, there was chronology, but the whole structure of the thing was not chronological. And that disturbed a lot of teachers, because teachers who think in terms of beginning from 1800, ending with 2000 or 1947, they felt disturbed. But we knew, and the experience of textbooks all over the world said that initially teachers are very resistant to changes, because their knowledge, the package of things they know, their knowledge structures are such that they would like to repeat that. They would like to operate within that. And as soon as you disturb that, there is an anxiety about your own sense of what you know and what you do not know. But we wanted all that to happen. The third point third or fourth point that we were very interested in some way, introducing students to the craft of writing history. Not to make them historians, obviously, but to make them understand the process through which historians write. And therefore, the sources, the kind of sources historians use, how historians read them, how they interpret them, that became part of the school textbook from class 6 through class 7, 8, 9. And class 12 textbook is entirely focused around different sources. There is a focus on the theme, but each chapter is an exploration of a particular source, from inscriptions and archaeology to oral history, from court chronicles to other travel accounts or biographies. Everything is being explored in different chapters. And the limits of that, the possibilities of that are things which we are exploring. So when you delete a chapter, you also delete this entire attempt to make students understand how historians write history. Now, in addition to this, we were also integrating the question of environment, gender, and other kinds of issues, which was part of the curriculum framework and which was part of our own sensitivity. But also, we attempted to write textbooks which were pedagogically different from the earlier textbooks written by Romila Thapar or Bipin Chand and others. They were authoritative texts, where the voice of the person coming through in the text is the voice of the knower, that we know and it is there, presented as knowledge. And the whole effort in school textbook writing was over the 80s and 90s was one where the process of teaching and writing a textbook was one where you wanted to integrate the student into the act of knowledge production in a sense. They should become part of a process where reading a source, they come to understand. You ask them to interpret a source. You ask them to understand the source from different angles. So they become part of a process where you make them aware of questions which can be asked. And therefore, the textbook is more open-ended. It does not give, at least we wanted it not to express the voice of authority behind the text in a certain sense. Whether we were successful or not is a different question. Now, what are the changes which is coming about and how do they affect all these efforts that we were trying to make? First, the point which has been very widely publicized and been written about is the question of the Muslims, the Mughals, the Islamic lands, etc. We see the space given to the Muslims, the space given to study of Islamic culture, the space given to the Mughals has shrunk in the textbooks. As yet, it's not a full-throated attack on Islam. In a lot of the right-wing attacks, there is a vitriol which is still missing in the changes that we see, but a large number of chapters, many chapters have been dropped. From class 12, the chapter on courts and chronicles, which was about the Mughal rulers, and that's been dropped, so there is no chapter on Mughal rulers in class 12. In chapter 11, the chapter on Islamic land, on the culture and on Islamic land, that's been dropped. In class 7, 2 pages were given to the Mughal rulers. You know, there was a discussion of Akbar and others, but we condensed the entire Mughal thing into 2 pages, because earlier there used to be chapters on each Mughal ruler. But we wanted students to at least know the names and some of the details of the Mughal ruler. Those 2 pages have gone. So they will not know who were the Mughal rulers. The 2 pages, which was a spread over 2 pages side, that's been deleted. Even a brief initiation into Mughal history in that class is gone. Second, there is been for the last 4 or 5 years, more about 7 or 8 years, there's been a consistent pressure to sanitize the NCERT textbooks. We have had petitions from various Brahminical groups, various NGOs, which claim to be writing history and looking at historical texts to do away with all reference, which in some sense criticizes Brahminism, in some sense what they see as present Indian society in a bad light. This is not coming in its most aggressive form in these textbooks, because earlier we have had to deal with legal cases where 250, 300 pages were given to us, all asking questions and demanding changes to be made, and we had to write 100, 150 pages answers to those things, but that is still not visible. But what is visible is a silent change which is taking place. I'll give just one example. In class 5, 6, there was a box on Varna system. The box began by saying that the Varna system was devised by the priests in the later Vedic period. Then it talked of the Varna system, and then it said the Varna system was criticized by many, was accepted by many, etc., etc. And it also said that the Shudras and the women and Shudras were not allowed to read the Vedas. Now, therefore, it asks the 3 or 4 historical questions. How did it come into being? why did it come into being, and what were the implications of it, and what really it was. Now, those first 4 or 5 lines have been deleted. The last 4 or 5 lines have been deleted, and only what the Varna system was. Varna system was Kshatriyas, what their attributes are, Brahmins, what they should be, and Shudras, how they are defined, and the Vaishyas, how they. So everything else is deleted, which is to implicate the authors in the ratification of the Varna system. No historical question, no critique of that. We did not offer ever in any page of the thing any strong didactic critique. We were very cautious about formulations where we presented the evidence, talked of it, but it made it appear that, made it clear to students what the structure was. Now that's what I call sanitization of a system, that you don't let the student ask a question about it. The third, the focus on the lower orders, that which was one of our, that is under attack very clearly. Not all the chapters have been removed, but we have, if I enumerate the chapters, on class 6, on class 7, the chapter on towns, traders, and craftspeople is dropped. In chapter 8, on the chapter on weavers, iron smelters, and factory owners are dropped. In chapter 11, the chapter on peasants and farmers have been dropped. Now, there's a clear pattern in this, that the feeling is that we need not focus so much on these marginal groups. What is more important are the dynastics, the kings, and the heroes who made history, not these plebeian groups and peasants. This is all supposed to be left-wing history writing. Fourth, the history of everyday life. This has been decimated. These sections are all gone. In class 9, we had 2 chapters, one on cricket and on clothing. Both chapters gone. The entire section is gone. So you have, instead of a book which ties up politics, political transformations with economic transformations and everyday life, you have again just political and the economic. The cultural and this thing is gone. In class 11, class 10, the chapter on novels and society is gone. So it is also inconsistent. In chapter 9, everything is gone. There is no section on everyday life. In chapter 10, there is a section on everyday life, one solo chapter there. So this is also seen as something which is not important. What is this everyday life? How is it important? That's the vision behind all these deletions. Yeah, sorry. And just to wind up, the chapters on art and culture, they have been deleted in most of the chapter. The chapters on urban history, again, why is that happened? I don't know. And most shocking, actually, is the chapter on partition has been deleted. So no students from class 6 to 12 are not introduced to the question of partition. Class 12 had a chapter which is also an exploration of oral history. That's all gone. Just to wind up, it's not that we don't want changes. Of course, there should be changes. Debates on curriculum and textbook should be there. But they should be driven by a vision of a new history, new changes, academic and intellectual concerns, not by political concerns and not by bureaucratic diktats. And they should be sensitive to the pedagogic issues of writing history. It's not just the content. It's not a debate between right and left. We were not displacing saffron books. That had already been done because the old textbooks had been brought in when we came in. We were debating amongst ourselves, amongst historians. So those kind of debates are dynamic, they're productive, they ought to happen. But bureaucratic diktats and political diktats are a problem. I'll stop.
Professor Satish Deshpande will address of NCERT for sociology textbooks, and the same, the development committee that was formed for the National Curriculum Framework of 2005.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The India Academic Freedom Network is a very new organization and a very, being new, we're also very eager. So we all know that a proper discussion on curriculum, textbooks, and so on requires far more preparation and much more time than this. But we were very eager to get started, particularly in the context of the changes that were being talked about, rationalizations, as they are called. So we are having this event somewhat as an initial event. So thank you for coming. And we hope to raise issues, as the other speakers have already done, that we will take up in greater detail later. So the standpoint from which, roughly speaking, we are starting is that the debate should not be about our textbooks versus your textbooks, or the textbooks of such and such a group versus such and such a group, but we should be all aiming towards better textbooks, whatever they are, better textbooks. Since there is, in my opinion, and I think it's a defensible opinion, there is no such thing as a perfect textbook. A textbook can always be improved. Contexts change, classrooms change, so change is the name of the game. So no textbook can remain static. So I'm focusing essentially on the changes that have been made, the stated rationale for these changes, and whether, when we look at the actual changes themselves, whether we can make sense of it in the terms of justification that have been used, and whether these changes amount to moving towards better textbooks, whatever we might mean by better. So I'm going to focus on only one textbook, this one, which is one of the two books for class 12 on sociology, which I was associated with, along with many others. And can you go into the full yeah. Previous, yes, stay there, yeah. This is what every textbook, I believe, has on its, as part of its front matter, where the rationale for the changes is being mentioned. If you notice, there are three main reasons being given for these changes or rationalizations. One, and this is stated to be a COVID-19 driven kind of thing, presumably therefore temporary, and if we have now come out of COVID-19, then presumably these justifications no longer hold, but this is all presumably. The first big reason is to reduce burden, to reduce the load on children. The second is to avoid repetition and overlap. And the third has to do with degree of difficulty. So the overall rationale is that in COVID time, things are difficult for students and their families, so we need to lighten their burden, and the rationalizations that are being done are done with this purpose in mind. What has actually been done in the name of rationalizations, I will try and show you briefly next. In terms of how these rationalizations were actually carried out, I would say about 95% plus is basically through deletions. There are very, very few additions, and there are very few modifications. Although I have to say that there are some modifications which are unexceptionable, such as updating of the population statistics in various chapters. So statistics have been updated. At the time that these textbooks were initially produced, we did not have access to the 2011 census. And since the 2011 census has become available since then, many of the statistics have been updated. So that is part of modification. There are also other minor changes. But before that, if you could just I thought we should start on a light note, so this is, you can go through these next few slides relatively fast. Change in color scheme. On the left is the old textbook, on the right is the new textbook. So please see what is happening with the color schemes. Yeah, jaldi ab. There are 2 chapters in green that have changed color, and there was 1 chapter in red that has now become pink. But other than that, it's just changes of shades. We can run through this to the next slide. But yes, now we see. That was just for fun. It's true that shades do change a lot in printing and so on. We were just talking about it. But maybe there's something wrong with the color green. I don't know. Let's look at the deletions. The number of deletions I've given, this is a very crude measure because how do you measure a deletion? A deletion of almost a page is also counts as 1. A deletion of 1 sentence also counts as 1. So this is very misleading. But even then, even with this crude measure, you can see where the major deletions are. And look at the last 2 lines. The second last line, the chapter on demography, as they say on Twitter and so on, in my humble opinion, chapter 2 would have been the prime candidate for cuts if reducing burden was the issue, because it has many technical demographic sort of concepts. We could have done without the population pyramid. It takes a long time to explain. Teachers always used to complain to me about that chapter, but that chapter has been left untouched. There are 0. In fact, it is the chapter that has benefited the most from the positive modifications, that is to say the updating of the statistics and so on. And the projects could have been slashed as well in COVID times as they were at all levels of the educational system, but those also remain intact. The major chunk of deletions happen in the chapter on the cultural diversity, chapters on social institutions, and patterns of inequality and change. Most of those are there. Next slide, please. I've tried to give a sense of what has been cut. And this is a very sort of first attempt at trying to classify this. Clearly, it's not accurate in the sense of precise, but it does try to give you a rough sense of what is there. I was very interested to see that anywhere where we have expressed uncertainty, where we say that we don't know, we as a discipline, or the textbook as a representative of the discipline does not know the correct answer to some question, those have been removed. And in sociology, that becomes a very big problem because we are all about multiple perspectives and how to deal with them. So if you take out multiple perspectives, there's very little that remains actually. So that's one major thing that's interesting thing, and it's not major in terms of quantity of cuts. Dalits and Adivasis, text having to do with them has suffered in quantitative terms the most cuts. And these are all cuts that show mainstream society in bad light vis-a-vis these groups. So those sections have tended to get cut. Very oddly, all references to authoritarian governments, regardless of political party, have been cut out in a very udar manner, in a very even-handed manner. References to the emergency have been cut out, as have references to the 84 riots as well as the 2002 riots. While this may seem as, Sarva Dharma Samabhava, but it's a bit odd that only those aspects of government have been selected. Another interesting set of cuts has to do with, we had put in what we thought was an interesting set of boxes on the Australian, Japanese, and other instances of historical victors, so to speak, apologizing, to the people whom they had conquered. So for example, there is an Australian government, various state governments in Australia, as well as the national government. There has been a debate about it going on for a long time, about an official acceptance of guilt and an apology that had been made. So we had that. We had the Japanese government, after a lot of debate within Japan, had apologized to Korea and Manchuria and parts of China and so on, places that they had colonized. These have been entirely excised, and there was an exercise on that. When I was looking at those, at the original textbook, I realized how far we have come from 2004-05 when these were written. I have to confess that I'm still quite stunned at what still remains in the textbooks compared to the times we are living in and the terms in which public discourse is being conducted today. I'm stunned at what our textbooks still contain, despite all these deletions. So there was an exercise after that when Victor's apologized box, which said, suppose you had such an exercise in India, which groups do you think should be? So I was just thinking that this is, I mean, what were we thinking at that point? But clearly 2004-05 was a different era. As they say, the past is a foreign country. And yeah, the last one I've already said, majoritarianism and authoritarianism have been excised. I'll just show you very quickly. Yes, this is from the... I don't think it'll be waste time. I'll just keep doing it. Okay, I'll go back. Right. So, leave it. Sorry, this is from the introduction. This is from page 2 of the textbook, where I thought we were being very, very candid and so on. But passages of this sort, when they occur elsewhere as well, have been taken out. Next slide, please. The line on top, for some reason, that one sentence has been removed. Again, this is a little bit mystifying. Does it reduce burden? But on the other hand, in chapter 2 in demography, a lot of numbers have been updated, including the numbers on the tribal population. So, ऐसा क्या परहेज इस population से मुझे समझ में नहीं आया. But anyway, this maybe it's a mistake, who knows. Then an entire box on what happens to Adivasis in the name of development. This is taken from a PUCL report and Frontline article. The entire box is gone. There are many such instances. This is just illustrative. Next. Again, the sentence on top has suddenly been excised. This is from a different chapter, just to give you a sense of what gets taken away and whether you can understand it as a reduction of burden or a taking away of redundancy or any of those justifications that were mentioned. And below you see a box on the Meghalaya Succession Act. This is basically on Khasi matrilineal. This was on varieties of family and has been entirely excised, as have been all references, all questions relating to this. Next slide. A small box on the life of a Dalit scavenger, one day in the life, taken from Harsh Mandar's book, has been excised. Many such things have been excised. Next. This was reported in the newspapers already. This was excised in the first round of rationalizations. That happened like 2 or 3 years ago, and this got reported in the press. This is, again, picked up from a newspaper report. The Gohana atrocity on Dalits in Haryana has been excised. Next. This is what I meant by majoritarianism. Any reference, explicit reference to majoritarianism has been removed. Yes, this is deleted. All the passages I'm showing you now have been deleted. No, please retain the previous one. So this occurs as part of a discussion of plurality and democracy and so on, and has been excised. Next. Okay, but in democratic politics, it is always possible to convert a numerical majority into political power through elections. This means that religious or cultural minorities, regardless of their economic or social position, are politically vulnerable. They must face the risk that the majority community will capture political power and use the state machinery to suppress their religious or cultural institutions, ultimately forcing them to abandon their distinctive identity. This is the passage that is cut out. This is a long passage. Again, this has been reported in the press earlier. This is the passage I was mentioning before, which seems to be an even-handed excision has been carried out, where both the 1984 riots and the 2002 riots are cut out. So this is a long passage that talks about what happens when communal riots happen and so on. This was what I was talking about, the Australian case. This is a longish box, almost a full-page box on the apology, the Australian, official Australian apology to the Aborigines and the Japanese government apology to Korea and Manchuria and so on. That is it. So what I was trying to do was to give you a quick sense. There is a lot more detail, and I know it's possible to argue things out. And if we were really going at it in full detail in one of our own committees, the sorts that we had endless discussions in at the time these textbooks were being made, I'm sure there would be arguments. But on the whole, I think it is fair to say that reduction of burden is not really the end that is being achieved by these cuts. And if so, if it is not the end that is being achieved, we need to think about what is being achieved. And if those goals, whatever goals we think are being achieved through these decisions, whether we need to think about what relationship these excisions might have to the subject of our little group here, academic freedom. Thank you.
Rajshri Chandra is next. She's a professor in the Department of Political Science at Janaki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University. Professor Chandra has written on a variety of, on various topics that concern us today, including pedagogy, education, curriculum, and copyright issues. So, yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Unlike my predecessors here on the panel, I have never been a part of either the NCERT curriculum or of the formation of Delhi University syllabi. So particularly with respect to the NCF, which is the National Curriculum Framework with respect to this, with respect to schools, I have no behind-the-scenes stories to share, or I do not have an idea of what the intent was. The intent of these textbooks can be gleaned or deduced by me only when I read the books. And with respect to political science, civics / social study books, the intent seems to be very, very clear, which is these are wonderful books, absolutely wonderfully illustrated, wonderfully conceptualized, and the intent very obviously is to give the students a sense of what a real, substantive, thriving democracy is. And why these changes have been brought about is not something I can reflect upon, but many of you may know that Yogendra Yadav and Suhas Palshikar, two stalwarts, two political scientists who had very lovingly mentored these books, publicly disassociated themselves from NCERT political science books. Subsequently, 33 political scientists also came out who had, in some capacity or the other, been a part of these books. So they also distanced themselves and demanded that their names be deleted. So let me try and give you a lowdown on what I think may have been their reasons for disassociation and distancing. So what I did was a little bit of an archaeology. I went through textbooks from class 6 onwards up until class 12, and did some kind of a archaeology work. While I will not be able to run you through all the revisions, I will be running you through all the significant changes which have been instituted. So what I found in the course of my perusal was that there are 5 problematic areas, or areas which the present dispensation may have found problematic. The first one is the usual suspect, which Niladri and Satish both have reflected upon, is Varna. At class 6, 7, and 8 level, references to Varna / caste, and I'm using them interchangeably. Second, substantive idea of equality, diversity, discrimination, dissent, anything which fills out the content of substantive idea of equality has been removed. And the third, idea of welfare or social democratic rights. So at the classes 6, 7, and 8, these are the 3 areas which have been axed from the syllabus. I will encroach upon Niladri's domain and begin with a textbook which has been titled Our Pasts, number 1, which is a class book textbook for history. Niladri has already mentioned, but I'll repeat here. So the excerpt which says the priest divided people into 4 groups called varnas. According to them, each varna had a different set of functions. All this has been reduced. Particularly the section on Shudras could not study the Vedas, or that they later got classified as untouchables. These are details which have been removed. Then changes in agriculture, a chapter titled Changes in Agriculture, last 4 lines removed. However, agriculture was back-breaking work. Generally, slave men, women, bracket, dasas and dasis, bracket close, landless agricultural laborers had to do this work. This has been removed. From social and political life, here the political science component or the civics component begins. Chapter 2 on diversity and discrimination. All references to diversity and discrimination have been removed. Here again, there is a passage which says people are engaged in different kinds of work, like teaching, carpentry, pottery, etc. And activities like cleaning, washing, cutting hair, picking garbage here are tasks that are seen of less value, and people who do this work are seen as dirty or impure. This belief is an important aspect of the caste system. In the caste system, communities, groups of people were placed in a sort of ladder where each caste was either above or below the other. Those placed themselves at the top of the caste of the ladder called themselves upper caste, all deleted or dropped, as the NCERT advisory says. The second group of references that have been dropped, or second group of discussions that have been dropped, have to do with equality. There is a chapter on discrimination and need to recognize dignity. From class 7 onwards, we see the introduction of, and this is really wonderfully done, of 3 protagonists. One is Kanta, who is a domestic worker. The other is, and you stay with them from class 6 to class 7 to class 8 as the theme becomes more complex and as it becomes more complicated. These other 3 protagonists have been used to illustrate it. So Kanta is a domestic worker, Om Prakash Valmiki, a well-known Dalit writer, and his childhood, and Mr. and Mrs. Ansari, who all experienced inequality in different ways. Now, it is through their experience that the concept of diversity and discrimination and dignity is introduced. Caste, of course, Om Prakash Valmiki. So there's a little reference about how he as a child was sweeping the floor of the school, and how he would get really tired, how he was discriminated against, how he was made to sit in a corner. That section has been removed. The section on recognizing dignity dropped. So these protagonists who illustrated discrimination, diversity, have not just been removed from class 7, but also from class 8, which introduces the constitution and asks the question, why do we need a constitution? Class 8 retains the lives and stories of Kanta, Valmiki, and Ansari by exploring a further question. Now that we know that they have been discriminated against, should the Constitution grant them protective rights? Should the Constitution give them reservations and adopt measures of affirmative action? Kanta, Valmiki, and Ansari were used to illustrate the following concepts: idea of substantive equality as different from just formal equality. Number 2, universal adult franchise. Kanta is shown to be standing in a line to vote. Inequality of access to resources, discrimination. Ansaris were looking out for a house to rent and they could not find. So there is a box which has that. Need for reservations and other forms of protective discrimination. So all these themes have been axed from the social and political life 1, 2, and 3, which is class 6, 7, and 8. At the level of class 8, there is a chapter called Who Are the People in the Parliament? The whole section on why historically marginalized people, Dalits, STs, women need reservation has been removed. From the chapter Understanding Laws, discussion on equality before law, example of corrupt politician, should he be liable by the same set of laws? Discussion on British law, example of sedition law as a colonial law and how these laws are now representative, that has been removed. So the focus clearly shifts from the substance of democracy to the process of democracy, so on how laws, etc., are formed. The third set of issues that have been removed from the syllabi and curriculum are welfare rights, social democratic rights, and the role of the government and judiciary. And here, there's a new protagonist who comes. He's called Hakim Sheikh. Some of you may know Hakim Sheikh was a member of Paschim Banga Khet Mazdoor Samiti. Why I say some of you may know, because he approached the Supreme Court and he filed a writ petition there. I'll come to it in a bit. So he was a member of the Paschim Banga Khet Mazdoor Samiti, an organization of agricultural laborers in West Bengal. He accidentally falls and he fell off a running train and suffered head injuries. He couldn't get admission in a public hospital, so he finally gets admitted in a private hospital where he receives treatment. He spends a lot of money on his treatment, angry and upset over the indifferent attitude of the hospital that refused to admit him. Hakim Sheikh and the Paschim Banga Khet Mazdoor Samiti files a court in the case. At the level, class 7 level, Hakim Sheikh's story was used to highlight how he felt he had a right to a minimum level of welfare, or how he felt he had a right to government help and government support at this level. At the class 8 level, his story is further, a further nuance is added to his story to highlight the role of judiciary in protecting welfare rights. In Paschim Banga Khet Mazdoor Samiti versus State of Bengal, the Supreme Court passed a historic judgment reading right to health as a part of Article 21, which is right to life. A whole section has been removed. Class 8, Understanding the Criminal Justice System, discusses the role of the police, the public prosecutor, defense lawyer, judge, acquaints the citizens of their fundamental rights, human rights, acquaints the citizens about what is a fair trial, all removed. Social movements from class 9 and 10 syllabus, all removed. The fourth category, excuse me, the fourth category that has been, can I have? The fourth area which has been removed is social movements. We see this beginning with class 8, but particularly so in class 9th and 10th. Chapter 3, Democracy and Diversity, removed. It discussed civil rights movement, black power, Dalit participation in the UN, origin of social differences, politics of social divisions and range of outcomes, how people perceive their identity, how leaders raise demand of any community, parameters of marginalization and social justice, all has been removed. Chapter 5 on social movements, completely removed. There were examples of democracy in Nepal, water wars in Bolivia, Green Belt movement in Kenya, BAMSEF, people's movement to describe collective action, Narmada Bachao Andolan, movement for right to RTI, anti-liquor movement, women's movement, environment movement. The entire chapter has been removed. Chapter 5, popular struggles and movement, predictably removed. Chapter 8, challenges to democracy, where the idea of authoritarianism and centralization of power was discussed, that has been removed. From class 12 curriculum, again, sections on rise of popular social movement has been removed. References to Kisan movement, party-based movements, Kisan Sabhas, their association with Marxist-Leninist ideas and parties dropped. 2 poems by Faiz have been removed from the section on religion. The new chapter has no literature or illustration of communalism. Communalism remains an abstract concept without realizing the violence it has caused in the sun as a living document. And I want to just read this one paragraph from the chapter. And I'll leave you to conclude the intent of these lines. It is not uncommon for nations to rewrite their constitutions in response to changed circumstances or changed ideas within the society, or even due to political upheavals. The Soviet Union, our template and our aspiration, the Soviet Union had 4 constitutions in its life of 74 years. In the context of India, more than 69 years after that, the same constitution continues to function as a framework within which the government of a country operates. What does this reveal about the change makers or the intent of these changes? It reveals a move to evacuate democracy of its substantive content. It reveals an intent to focus on democracy as a set of processes which can be portrayed as apolitical and benign. It reveals a move to eliminate all references to discrimination and dissent, discrimination forming the basis of dissent and accountability in a democracy. If students don't appreciate the role of dissent and accountability in democracy, it becomes far easier to portray collective actions like strikes, rallies as anti-development, disruptive of business, disruptive of the nation, against the betterment of society, and so on. So this is what is at play with the changes in the NCF school curriculum. Let me very quickly take you through revisions in political science. Maya will be speaking after me, and she will run you through exactly how the process, how these changes have been done. But let me tell you what these changes have been in the political science syllabus. Out of 20 papers in the honors course, 3 of them are on public administration and public policy. These are not elective but compulsory courses. In comparison, political theory has 2 papers. Western political thought is only 1 paper. Western political thought stops at John Locke, which is 18th century. 17th century. It stops at John Locke. There is no Rousseau, there is no Bentham, there is no Karl Marx, there is no John Rawls. Any student who is graduating from political science without a basic knowledge of these theories and these theorists is going to find it, is going to have a very, very weak foundation. And this is not, I'm not trying to make a case for, I'm not trying to suggest that, you know, we have to be, we have to be slavishly indebted to Western concepts and Western political thoughts. But the truth is that our institutions are modern. The idea of the nation state itself is a modern idea. Our institutions are modern. They are derived from the Anglo-American traditions. And since ideas and structures are both derived from Anglo-American political traditions, so predictably our tools of analysis are also derived from there. We use them to not just, we use them, we challenge them, we debate them, but they are the fulcrum of our analysis. How else do we teach ideas which are modern, rights are modern. The idea of freedom itself is modern. The idea of liberty is modern. The idea of social justice, the idea of multiculturalism. These are all modern ideas. We cannot go back in history and so we need tools of political analysis, and these are not, these have been devalued in the present syllabus. This is not an advocacy of Western intellectual tradition. It is an advocacy of a solid foundation for discipline and disciplinary training that equips students with analytical tools which are drawn both from Indic and Western traditions. From the pool of elective courses, democratic processes and social movements, that is a paper that has been removed. Please note that these changes are being made in real time. The syllabi for semester 7 and semester 8 are still not ready. Some of these may find place there, some of these may find space there, but the truth is that in all likelihood, majority of the students are going to graduate, or majority of the students are going to use the exit option after semester 6. Human rights in a comparative perspective removed. Understanding Gandhi has been removed. But let me come to the biggest, okay, just 2 minutes. Predictably, IPT became the most, Indian political thought became the most contested and least defended of courses. Gandhi, Pandita Ramabai, Barni, Kabir, Iqbal become the most obvious casualties, but less obviously everybody else, Nehru, Iqbal, Ram Mohan Roy, Vivekanand, Tagore, Abul Fazl, etc., who get a shrunk space ranging from 1.5 hours per semester to 2 hours in the entire semester. What is more puzzling is that Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata and its idea of kingship, Raj Dharma, has been dropped. Gandhi has been dropped as an elective course. Bear with me for just one detail. Within the Indian political thought paper, he gets a total of 5 hours in comparison to Savarkar, who gets a total of 53 hours. Full elective course in the, so Savarkar gets 45 hours as a full elective course, plus 8 hours in the Indian political thought syllabus. Vivekanand, who's waiting patiently as a potential excellent candidate for an elective course, gets a total of 2 hours. Pandita Ramabai, whose contribution to education of women, widow remarriage, challenge to patriarchy and gender roles is remembered by all of us with gratitude and admiration, no longer finds a space in the syllabus. She makes space for no obvious reason for Tarabai Shinde. Perhaps the reason could be because Pandita Ramabai converted from Hinduism to Christianity. That seems to be the most obvious problem that could have happened. But apart from the content, the new UGCF, which is undergraduate curriculum framework, devalues disciplinary training. The number of credits which have been allotted to 3 years are reduced. Instead of 5 lectures a week, we now get 3 lectures to deliver the same course content. So if expulsion doesn't do it, it is death by reduced time. I just want to end by saying that we are here today because we need to make a stronger case to the public. We need to say that curriculum revision is not just about curricula, but about academic freedom in general. We need to say to the critics, both on the right and the left, alike, how academic freedom and democratic freedom are connected. We need to say that a strong democracy needs independent schools and universities. Just like the coasts must be left free to pursue justice, similarly, academic institutions must be left free to pursue truth. Thank you.
The last speaker in today's panel, Maya John. Maya teaches at Jesus and Mary College in the University of Delhi. She's also she's the author of this recently edited book, Debating Education. And she has been part of history syllabus revisions in Delhi University and is also a member of the Academic Council. So, Maya.
Okay, I'm sorry. First of all, thank you to everyone who has put this program together. Much appreciated and much needed endeavor. I've basically been listening to my colleagues before me, and they have laid a very useful template, a framework to take the discussion forward. And I'm building from there by focusing particularly on violations. Violations of procedures and protocols that are supposed to be, used, that are supposed to be there during syllabus revision. Now, of course, you must have heard, a lot of the discussions so far, a lot of the points raised by the speakers before me, and we know this for a fact. We have watched these processes in our own university or been part of them earlier. We know that there is a particular process to syllabus framing and syllabus revision, the correct process, which recognizes that scholarship in the existing, syllabus, in the existing curriculum, has evolved over a period of time following established, protocols of professional research, peer review, etc. So the existing body of scholarship that exists in university, syllabi, university curriculums, such as the history syllabus taught in a university like DU, has often been constituted. The existing scholarship in the curriculum has often been constituted by scholars of, national and international repute. They're known across the world, and therefore any new intervention, therefore must consider the insights and the arguments of the, and engage with the existing body of scholarly work. Now, curriculum revision, therefore, involves what many of us here are trying to indicate, reassert. It involves a constructive engagement with earlier work on the basis of recognized forms and methods of research, rather than just merely erasing, chopping, dropping, earlier scholarship and very consciously going after and expunging certain concepts or frameworks or terminology in the supposed bid to quote-unquote rationalize or to quote-unquote correct imbalances in course material. For the curriculum revision to unfold, therefore, in a sound academic manner, the time assigned to the process and the respect for statutory bodies and procedures is absolutely crucial. Unfortunately, in the bid to abide with the diktats of the ruling dispensation about, being seen as proactively or in a timely manner, quote-unquote timely manner, implementing the provisions of the, National Education Policy 2020, the administration in a university like DU, Delhi University, has literally wielded a sword on the head of university and college teachers and has, basically rushed through the entire process of syllabus making. And this is something we've been seeing, over the last few years in particular, and especially in 2022, early 2023, when the 4-year undergraduate curriculum of the University of Delhi was framed. So, there's not enough time being provided for general body meetings of, university teachers to convene, deliberate, reach a consensus on how are they going to envisage a syllabus that somewhere syncs with the, new framework or new notifications. So the process is naturally, being challenged where consensus, deliberation is constantly thrown out of the window. Now the deadlines are, ridiculous. The deadlines given or prescribed for syllabus revision. Sometimes we just get a few days. I know disciplines where just one night has been given to overhaul, re-envisage the syllabus and make it, somewhat along the format of a 4-year undergraduate program in that discipline. So of course, what I'm getting at is that the deadlines imposed themselves by the university administrations reflect a serious violation of established procedures. The larger agenda, is that by doing so, you actually arm twist the teaching community, the academia, to comply with imposed templates for syllabus revision. Now, bogged down by ridiculous deadlines and various university diktats, statutory bodies such as committee of courses, which every discipline, every department, has in place in a university. Now, these bodies, they struggle to revise the syllabi in a rigorous and efficient manner. And given the paucity of time provided by the university administration, for example, in the case of framing a 4-year undergraduate program, a large number of disciplines have been, unable to revisit their courses in a rational way in which it syncs with, the reduced credit weightage of the courses taught at the undergraduate level, and therefore the reduced teaching hours per week, which my colleague, Rajshri already indicated. So the skewed process results very often in a hodgepodge of reconstructed syllabi with some new content and new teaching schedules or weekly teaching hours grafted very awkwardly onto an older syllabus. The injustice done in the name of syllabus making is even more evident when we consider the politically motivated, unsavory, non-academic interventions made in the syllabus making process of several disciplines during the proceedings of statutory bodies of any university, such as the Standing Committee on Academic Matters, the Academic Council, etc. Now, I will come to some pertinent examples of, the non-academic interventions in syllabus framing in a few minutes. And what I would like to quickly move on for now is that, there is a dismantling that is happening of, procedure, of established protocols, so as to push through a diluted syllabus in the name of so-called rational curriculum revisions. And this is happening not just in Delhi University. I think we are pretty clear about this. This is unfolding in many public-funded universities. DU, however, is the exemplum. Being the largest undergraduate teaching university as well as a very large research university as well. In this slide, the recent curriculum revisions in social science disciplines like history, sociology, political science, philosophy, economics, etc., which are taught in DU, Delhi University, are alarming and detrimental for the academia at large, especially considering, as I said, the DU is an exemplum, because we have to remember the DU syllabi is a template that is used extensively by other public funded universities, and we also have to factor in that the dilution of its erstwhile courses has a signaling effect for the private higher education sector, which is eager to lap up students who are disappointed with what's happening in DU and therefore turning down DU and other public funded universities and taking admission in private universities. Now, the desire to control what is taught in the university classrooms across the country is a prominent agenda of the recent or current ruling dispensation, for which it is using the National Education Policy 2020 to the hilt. First, to undermine the functioning of statutory bodies established under the individual acts of various universities. We know, for example, that Delhi University is functioning under a 1922 Parliament Act. We have, for example, the Gujarat government's Common Universities Bill, which stands to be passed very soon. I don't want to keep this just DU-centric, so I'm quoting other examples from other parts of the country. Now, drawing on the logic of the NEP 2020, the Gujarat Common Universities Bill, for example, allows for the 6 public universities in the state to do away with the elected component in statutory bodies such as the Senate and the syndicate, that is leaving no representation to students, faculty, etc., in crucial decision making. Places that we could still fight and defend the logic of good curriculum revision and updation. These are the ways in which they're taking it away. Secondly, the current ruling agenda is to push through the common template of a 4-year undergraduate program. Again, they're drawing on the logic of NEP 2020 to do this. And because they're enforcing this common 4-year template for an undergraduate program throughout the central universities of the country, you are seeing curriculum revisions happening hectically across the country. And the exercise actually of this having this common template for an undergraduate course goes back a little while back. In 2021, suddenly, out of the blue, the University Grants Commission uploaded a history syllabus framework, right? So how is history to be taught in central universities? So this is the history honors course. And this has happened in 2021, and it was immediately questioned, and this was because, it had outdated reading lists, it had expunged renowned, scholars of ancient, medieval, and modern Indian history. And just to give you one example, in a modern India paper that the UGC had uploaded in 2021 as a common template, as an example for all universities to follow, it was a paper dated for the period 1947 to 2000. The reading list confounded the historian Bipin Chandra with the nationalist leader Bipin Chandra Pal, attributing 2 of the historian's books to the nationalist leader. So needless to say, the UGC template for a history undergraduate course was strongly opposed on very sound grounds. And consequently, because of the pressure, this is why I feel initiatives like this and platforms like this are very important, meetings like this are very important. They gave us the fuel to move forward, to resist, because there was that, furor. So, रातों रात वो 2021 का history syllabus UGC से हटा दिया गया. It's just as quietly as it came, it was quietly removed. Now, of course, Delhi University's history department, refused. I remember the general body meeting of history team. We are now going to adopt, this UGC framework for a history honors course. So, of course, it is clear that, common templates, which this regime is trying to push through, are heavily contested. They're resisted, and so there has been a concerted effort to literally pack syllabi committees with political yes-men, and to launch there's no way you can say it, there's no other word for it, to launch a cultural war. to launch a cultural war within academic committees, within statutory bodies. Now, the violation of established protocols and procedures, the kind of bodies I mentioned a little earlier, Committee of Courses, Senate, et cetera, general body meetings. So the violation of established protocols, giving them time to function in a rational manner, to deliberate on things, the dismembering of, the existing statutory bodies, remember the Gujarat Common Universities Bill, the dismissal of the informed academic decisions of statutory bodies like the Committee of Courses, which is constantly being heckled, no, take back this paper, replace this paper with something else, drop this reading, and the corresponding revision of curriculums amount to nothing but sheer bulldozing. That's what's happening. Now, the violations of the procedure become important for us to flag, wherever we get the chance, because through these violations, through this dismemberment, the attempt is to win the cultural war at any cost. Now, it is an open secret that the current ruling dispensation has been weak in academia. Because, it is steeped in a worldview which requires complete subservience and uncritical adherence to certain dogmatic understandings of, Indian social systems and India's, so-called adhering to a so-called glorified notion of India's past. Now, this has resulted in a paucity of intellectuals who can draw recognition for intellectual prowess within the domestic and international community of scholars and social scientists. So within this milieu, political cronyism and various other forms of nepotism are unleashed to dominate over what? To dominate over knowledge production and its dissemination. The effort to dominate knowledge production is restricted, remember, not only to syllabus framing, syllabus or curriculum revision, but also comprises the effort to control funding for research. Some of the speakers before me indicated this. I think Professor Anita Rampal did. What is happening to many research institutions for science. We know where the funding is being prioritized. So you want to promote research topics which are favorable to the regime. And of course, this is also an effort to control who will teach in the university system. And hence, we see nepotism and favoritism in the appointment process of university teachers. Much has been reported about this recently in regards to Delhi University, so I don't want to go into the details. Of course, it is a given fact that syllabus making, none of us here are naive people. We know we've come from those processes, that syllabus making, which is one important part of this knowledge production, is always fraught with tension, with conflict, with debates. But what we are now seeing, is the using of institutional might to settle the cultural war, wherein more than pedagogy, more than content, it is politics, in the narrow sense of the term, which decides what is to be taught. The committees above the department level committee of courses, above the general body of teachers, we have massive heckling and haggling with teachers breaking down and crying, just trying to defend, the logic of their syllabus. So massive heckling and haggling, and even when there is a forceful opposition from common teachers, their elected representatives and heads of departments, certain themes and topics are simply, so far we've been using words like, I think, dropped. I'm going to use something more forceful, chop. It's literally chop, 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 chop. It's going like that. So, topics and themes are chopped and rearranged in such a way that they are, as again my colleague mentioned, Rajshri, they're relegated to the last year of the undergraduate course, the 7th and 8th semester, with the tacit understanding that many students will exit by then, the university system by then, and will not choose, the more advanced studies in the 4th year. Now, the chopped themes and topics lose their organicity. So how in the modern Indian history paper, for example, I have been informed that, an introductory framing unit 1, there's pressure now in the department to push that is the last unit when we're all running to finish our syllabus, we'll not be able to do justice to it. That's where they want to push it. Very important themes like this. So we are not supposed to analyze, but simply reproduce a particular ruling way of looking at India's past. and we're supposed to indulge in glorification, and that is the only mode acceptable now to narrate our past. So much so that there is a huge hue and cry in many of the syllabus committees. A history paper, for example, titled Historical Methodology. There is pressure now on the department to redraft the paper and to teach students about pagination, footnoting, etc. Now, this paper, Historical Methodology, was seen as a subversive, a paper that is subversive and particularly said to tarnish the image of, our society, because it was honing. The paper was actually honing the students' skill of looking at everything in society in a historical way. So it is made out that, our actual discipline-specific, methodology papers, are anti-national. So ironically, historical methods and practices accepted worldwide to be actually taught to an undergraduate student, is sought to be very consciously expunged by interfering with, important foundational methodology papers, Now, history courses were also attacked for their use of feminist concepts and terminology like patriarchy. Now, pressure to remove reputed feminist writers, historians from the reading list is, has been reported. So basically, there's this entire agenda, this entire endeavor to expunge, feminist scholarship, terms such as patriarchy, etc., which basically help the teacher and the student to interrogate tradition, which exposes, very deeply ingrained and, persisting patriarchal practices in our society. Now, across the board, this is not just history, but across the board, social science disciplines in the recent cycle of curriculum revisions have been heckled into, bullied into dropping, framing concepts and internationally accepted, terminology, academic terminology, precisely due to the attention that these concepts or terms draw to differentiation, inequalities, discrimination, and hierarchy within social systems in the Indian subcontinent. Hence, I would like to bring in the example of one department apart from history, which is the economics department of Delhi University. There was a conscious effort to chop its papers that analyzed race, class, caste, gender, unpaid work. And there was this entire process in the standing committee and later in the academic council where the views, informed views of economics professors, was literally again being challenged. And we have in the public arena the vice chancellor making arguments like, why don't you want to teach successful models like America and Europe? Why not frame papers accordingly? Of course, in the same breath, the vice chancellor, in the same media reports, was talking of decolonizing knowledge of our syllabi. So clearly, decolonizing knowledge amounts to literally nothing but empty rhetoric. Now, I must end with the reference to the content of syllabi and what's happening with respect to syllabi framing, content framing, of what I would call, the dual mode public funded universities. So we know this, perhaps, that, many of our public funded universities have a regular mode functioning and an ODL mode, open and distance learning mode, or correspondence mode running. And the reality is that there are much larger number of students enrolled in the correspondence mode than in the regular mode, both at the undergraduate and postgraduate level. Now, what's happening there? Sometimes our focus is perhaps a lot on the regular mode syllabi framing and, its impact on students. But what about this huge quarter of, material that's framed by public funded universities for correspondence mode students? And it also requires us to look closely even at what we'd call an open university like IGNOU's material. There has been complaints about how its quality and, its personal contact programs have also seen a change, in the last few years. So, these are areas we really need to connect and look at carefully and build, our resistance. So just to, I would just like to illustrate, if we were to pick up the self-learning material, compiled for correspondence mode students in a dual mode university, in public funded university, we would be shocked by the quality, literally shocked by the quality. I've been working on this, I'm making an inventory along with some colleagues on the mistakes and the the atrocious, errors in this material that's, printed or uploaded and sent to, first generation learners, the poorest of the poor students who are enrolling in our university systems on the margins, I'll just give you an example. The mistakes for me actually go to show not only like a, ill-founded design, but sheer incompetence. Please go back to an argument I made that, there is, the ruling regime is backing a section of academia that actually has very little to do with academics. As the content that's put together, for example, correspondence mode students, is put together by people who are still pursuing their PhDs, etc., and they're packed, they're packing these kind of scholars into these institutions, the correspondence mode institutions, and simply because they're close to the dispensation. So it's an not just an ill-founded, element or design reflected in the mistakes of the content, learning content, but it's also an incompetence because the people framing this, self-learning material or syllabus content are people who are basically there because they're close to the political regime. Now in semester 2, I'll just, just the example that I wanted to give is, this is from a BA Honours Semester 2 Political Science paper distributed to correspondent mode students by university. We have grave factual errors. Now I'm not highlighting the analytical errors, but just a few illustrative factual errors. For example, there are wrong names provided for historical persons. Subhash Chandra Bose is spelled as Subhash Chandra Bose, B-O-S-S, okay? Acharya, so instead of Acharya Narendra Dev, okay? Acharya Narendra Dev, we have Acharya Narayan. Instead of Edmund Burke, please, B-U-R-K-E, the spelling is Edmund Bark, B-A-R-K. Wrong facts, that Syed Ahmad Khan formed the Muslim League in 1906. The fact that Syed Ahmad Khan died in 1898, how will you account for? Wrong concepts. Please note, we are very familiar with this in history of the safety valve theory and the formation of the Indian National Congress. This material, second semester political science paper called Political Process in India, the pressure cooker theory is what it's called. The pressure cooker theory regarding the formation of Congress, for your reference, So I would just end with saying that, I'm deeply perplexed, very pained that decades of scholarship based on peer review, on proper research, are tendentially being, ignored and are tendentially going to go into waste. This is why academicians, need to come out and resist more vocally, and therefore initiatives like this need to go on. Meetings like this are very productive and important. And with reiterating that the future of nations are made in our classrooms. So what is happening in our classrooms shows an intensive crisis about our future. Further deliberation on this I leave to all of you. Thank you.
I was just informed by Professor Purvanand that we are soon going to break for tea in a bit. So what we really wanted was, also as much as listening to the speakers, also a discussion, some questions and, from the audience. So I open the floor for about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. They can be addressed to the panel, and we'll begin. I'm hoping there'll be questions, of course. So with 3 to 4 questions first, and we can, decide who in the panel wishes to answer them. If there's a mic, and yes, if you could just introduce yourself as you ask your question.
मेरा नाम फिरोज़ है, मैं दिल्ली के एक प्राथमिक स्कूल में पढ़ाता हूँ। तो एक सवाल तो मेरा सभी पैनलिस्ट से और शायद ऑडियंस से भी कि जैसे आपने भी इशारा किया कि इनको इतना साल क्यों लगे ये करने में, इनके पास तो बहुत ताकतवर सत्ता थी। तो ये एक खाली एक क्यूरियोसिटी है कि आखिर इतने साल क्यों लगाए इन्होंने करने में, जो पहले बार नहीं लगाए थे इतने साल। दूसरा प्रोफेसर अनिता रामपाल से है कि ये फाउंडेशनल लिटरेसी और न्यूमरेसी के तहत, फाउंडेशनल लिटरेसी न्यूमरेसी के तहत जो EVS, मैं प्राइमरी टीचर हूँ तो EVS हटा दिया गया है, वो मैं देख रहा हूँ। तो क्योंकि वो अपने आप में बहुत ख़तरनाक विषय है, जिस तरह से पुरानी किताबों में प्रस्तुत किया गया था। मगर एक चीज़ की तरफ मैं ध्यान खींचना चाह रहा हूँ कि इसके पीछे जो एक संस्था है, उसका नाम मैं ले सकता हूँ प्रथम, और उसके जो कर्ता रहे हैं, तो अभी हाल में ही जो प्रमुख विपक्षी दल है उससे जुड़ी संस्था ने उनको सबसे बड़ा पुरस्कार दिया है। तो ये फाउंडेशनल लिटरेसी न्यूमरेसी का जो हवा है वो खाली इधर से नहीं आ रहा है, उसको एक व्यापक एक सहमति मिल गई, जो कि हेजोमेनिक आइडिया बहुत बहुत ख़तरनाक है। वो हमें याद रखना चाहिए कि वो एक तरफा नहीं है मामला। और बाकी एज ए टीचर मैं खाली ये भी पूछना चाह रहा था, बात करना चाह रहा था कि एज टीचर्स जब तक ये सुबह नहीं होती है, जब तक हम लड़ रहे हैं, तो क्लास में हम क्या कर सकते हैं?
जी, और सवाल?
How will you answer?
सवाल जवाब चाय पर भी हो सकते हैं, इसके लिए हम आपको उत्साहित करेंगे। तो अनीता,
फिरोज़, आपने जो पूछा है ये तो हम आप लोगों से सुनना चाह रहे हैं। ये सही है, ये जो फाउंडेशनल लिटरेसी और न्यूमरेसी का एक डम्बिंग डाउन किया जा रहा है, और इसको विश्व में अभी ग्लोबल मॉनिटरिंग रिपोर्ट में ये कहा गया कि प्रथम और सेंट्रल स्क्वायर फाउंडेशन हैव क्लेम्ड that this is their achievement, that they have pushed foundational learning into the national education policy. So इसके पीछे बहुत बड़ा मुहिम है, और this dumbing down is also कि we know प्राइवेट स्कूल से जो करना चाहते हैं वो करते हैं, कोई पूछता भी नहीं है कौन सी किताबें यूज़ कर रहे हैं, कौन छाप रहा है, सही है गलत है, जो भी है। बट फॉर द पब्लिक सिस्टम this is what is happening, and also now because you remove anything called the environmental science, आप कहिए उसका अजीबोगरीब उसका तर्क दिया गया है, और आप उसको हटा ही दीजिए और कहिए कि do physical education, do art education, language numeracy, सॉरी लैंग्वेज नहीं, लिटरेसी न्यूमरेसी अपने में शब्दावली भी ये अंकित कर रही है कि मंशा क्या है। और जिस तरह से वो पेडागोजी बता रहे हैं, वो कह रहे हैं बिल्कुल पुरानी, जो अब हमारे ही यूनिवर्सिटी में कितना रिसर्च है, आप लोगों का अपना एक्सपीरियंस है जो बताता है, ये कहते हैं कि 2 स्टेजेस तक आप सिर्फ डिकोड करते रहिए, अक्षर पढ़िए और स्वर देखिए, अक्षर पढ़िए अल्फाबेट्स एंड देन decoding only, and in the 3rd stage you come to meaning because your burden of decoding has been reduced. I mean, these are outdated theories. You can't be reading without meaning. We have many of our language people here, and so this is what is being pushed. So it is, you're right कि ये केवल एक अकस्मात ऐसे नहीं कि कुछ हटा दिया कुछ बदल दिया, बड़ा मुहिम है, और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पे भी इसको प्रस्तुत किया जा रहा है, इसको पेश किया जा रहा है, और इसको सराहा भी जा रहा है। तो ये आप क्या करेंगे क्लास में, ये आप बताएंगे। एंड many often it is true, like you recognize that in primary schools, Delhi government of course has made it very difficult for people to be engaging with what they always have done. प्राइमरी स्कूल में काफ़ी छूट होती है, कोई बोर्ड एग्ज़ाम नहीं होता, आप बहुत कुछ करते हो, और आप समझते हो कि बच्चे कहाँ से आ रहे हैं, क्या जानते हैं, कितना जानते हैं। ये पॉलिसी करिकुलम फ्रेमवर्क कर रहा है, बच्चों को बिल्कुल उनको बर्डन मत करो, बाद में जाके उनकी अवधारणाएं बनेंगी। बट NCF told us that we will be amazed by what our children know. And I think that comes from a lot of practice and experience. But we will have to resist this. I know that as teachers, I'm happy that you've at least come and raised this issue, but I know that what is going on, our teachers, one of our own students who said, we are not trained as students here in Delhi University as teachers to segregate and discriminate between teachers, between students. Delhi government उनको अलग नाम देके अलग curriculum देता है, पता भी नहीं चलता वो करिकुलम अलग होता है, वो इम्तिहान अलग होता है. It's even dumber than what is being given for every other child because these are weak students. Then you throw them out into open school. We have to resist. उस टीचर का ट्रांसफ़र हो गया, उसको 1.5 साल पनिश किया गया. We know ये हो रहा है. I hope others also know and raise these issues because our school teachers are really facing a lot of flack. I'll leave it here.
एक प्रश्न था कि एज मेंबर ऑफ साइंटिफिक कम्युनिटी व्हाट कैन वी डू, ये सवाल है जो ऑनलाइन कुछ लोग देख रहे हैं उनमें से, तो अगर आप में से कोई जवाब देना चाहें.
Can I respond from here to अभी क्यों changes आए हैं?
हाँ प्लीज,
वहाँ जाकर
यू हैव टू गो.
I'll just take a minute. At दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी के लेवल पर इसका बहुत ही एक सीधा आंसर है. वो ये है कि इस स्केल पर चेंजेस लाने के लिए आपको इंस्टीट्यूशन यूनिवर्सिटी के हर लेवल को पॉपुलेट करना और पैक करना बहुत ज़रूरी है. सो इसके पहले जो टीचर्स यूनियन थी वो DTF थी. तो इट इज़ वेरी इम्पॉर्टेंट फॉर देम, it is very important for them to have their people at every possible level, whether it is elected bodies or whether it is nominated bodies or whether it is term bound body. तो ये अभी मुमकिन हुआ है क्योंकि ये सारी चीज़ें all these things have come together only now.
हेलो, मेरा नाम रवि कौशल है और मैं एक जर्नलिस्ट हूँ. आमतौर पे मेरी सवाल पूछने की कोई जो है जिज्ञासा या आग्रह नहीं होता है, लेकिन मैं एक सवाल आप लोगों से पूछना चाह रहा था कि जब मैं घर से आज जब निकला तो कैब में बैठा तो मैं जब आज घर से निकला और कैब में बैठा तो जो कैब वाले भैया थे वो इस बात पे बहुत खुश थे कि अभी जो बारिश हुई है उसमें मुसलमानों के घर डूब गए हैं. तो ये मैं आपसे जानना चाह रहा था, मतलब हालांकि ये थोड़ा सा इतर सब्जेक्ट है, लेकिन हमारी किताबों ने नफ़रत को डील क्यों नहीं किया?
अभी के लिए आखिरी सवाल, माफ़ कीजिए.
सर, मैम, मेरा नाम नवनीत है. मैं दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी से अभी एमफिल कर रहा हूँ डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ हिस्ट्री से, और मेरा काम एजुकेशन के फील्ड पे ही है, बुक्स पे, NCERTs वगैरह पे. तो मैंने अपने काम के दौरान ये पर्टिकुलर चीज़ जो देखी वो ये देखा कि जो ऑथर्स हैं वो कॉपीराइट के बारे में भी बात कर रहे हैं. रोमिला थापर मैम ने भी अपनी बुक के कॉपीराइट के बारे में लिखा है कि कैसे कॉपीराइट्स पहले हुआ करते थे, जिसमें ऑथर्स से पूछा जाता था ये चीज़ कि कोई भी रिवीजन अगर आ रही है तो उस पर उनकी क्या राय है, वो क्या उस रिवीजन को चाहते हैं या नहीं चाहते हैं. आज के टाइम में हम जो भी रिवीजन और डिलीशंस देख रहे हैं 2014 से लेकर के 22 के बीच में 3 बार रिवीजन्स हो चुके हैं. इनमें जो कंटेम्प्रेरी ऑथर्स हैं उनसे उनकी राय नहीं ली जा रही है कि वो क्या चाहते हैं, उनका इन रिवीजन्स पे क्या व्यू है. और जो 2024-25 से नई गवर्नमेंट जो बोल रही है कि वो नए बुक्स लाने वाली है, उनके ऑथर्स कौन हैं, आखिर ये मिस्ट्री क्यों बनी हुई है कि उनके ऑथर्स के नामों को रिवील नहीं किया जा रहा है. इसका क्या आइडिया है इसके पीछे, ये आपकी राय क्या है इन सारी चीज़ों पे? थैंक यू.
तो ये आखिरी 2 सवाल थे, इसके बाद हम चाय पर सवाल जवाब करेंगे. आप में से जो भी जवाब देना चाहें. नीलाद्रि प्लीज.
Just on the question of consultation with advisors, authors and others who produced the book. Between 2009 and 2016, there are many, I'm just talking of the history textbook, there are many court cases, there are many petitions, there are many reports and many demands for revision. On each of those cases, we were asked as advisors and editors, those are asked to come and meet, and any chapter on which changes were demanded, we asked the authors to come and meet, and we had regular meetings in NCERT to discuss all these changes. As I said earlier, in one of those cases where an NGO had filed a case against NCERT, and then NCERT asked us to produce evidence against those 200, 300 pages which are produced. We also wrote 150 pages. So in each of these cases, we took some comments into account, accepted some suggestions if we thought they were valid, but in most cases, we rejected those. They came from Rajput associations, Brahmin associations, NGOs which claimed to be doing history, plus many other kinds of groups. From 2016 onwards, that was the last time I think 2016, till now, no change which has been introduced, has been discussed in the case of history, and I think for others, has been discussed with advisors, whether it is the chief advisors, the advisors, and authors. They have been arbitrarily been introduced and carried through without any discussion. And therefore, on that issue, there can be no doubt. There is no discussion. On the question of copyright, the copyright, there's a claim which was made by NCERT that the copyright, the committees were disbanded after the textbooks came into existence, and therefore the authors, that is the political science authors who withdrew their names, they had no right to actually protest against it. But the authors have the copyright. And this was a lie from the NCERT. The authors have the copyright with the provision that NCERT has a right to make minor changes. None of the changes that we have discussed are minor changes. They're all major changes. Chapters, in some books, 4 chapters, 5 chapters. In other books, the deletions which have been listed are major deletions. Therefore, there is no question of the copyright being with the NCERT. They had a right to change minor things. They have gone ahead and done major changes. So those are the 2 things which we need to consider when we are thinking about all the changes that have been made.
अभी नवनीत ने शायद पूछा था कि लोगों के नाम नहीं पता चलते हैं। ये ध्यान रखें कि कुछ नाम जो सामने हैं वो ज़रूरी नहीं कि वही नाम है, पीछे बहुत लोग लिख रहे हैं। और अभी जो क्लास 1 और क्लास 2 की किताबें आई हैं, नई किताबें एनसीईआरटी की, उसमें सलाहकार एक ही हैं। It doesn't matter what your expertise is, but the advisor for both the language and the maths book is the director NCERT. So, और नाम और भी कई बड़े बड़े नाम हैं जो ज़रूरी नहीं कि लिख रहे हैं। NCERT के लोग खुद in confidence tell us कि उनको भी नहीं मालूम किताबें जब लिखी जाती हैं। कई बार उनको पता चलता है बाद में जब किताब तैयार है। So इसलिए we now understand what this entire ecosystem is like, and so how do we go about placing what our concerns are and raising issues that are going to affect generations, affect millions of our children and teachers.
I'm not sure कि मैंने पूरे सवाल को सही समझा कि हमारे एग्जिस्टिंग करिकुलम में चाहे स्कूल लेवल का हो, यूनिवर्सिटी लेवल का हो, क्या हम ऐसे इश्यू को जिसको नफ़रत आइडेंटिफाई किया, नफ़रत जैसे चीज़ को क्या हम ठीक से मतलब एंगेज कर पा रहे हैं क्या यूथ को? ये हमारे करिकुलम में प्रॉपर्ली डिस्कस्ड है? क्योंकि अदरवाइज जनरल जो सेंस ऑफ कम्युनलाइज्ड फीलिंग है हमें बार बार क्यों दिख रहा है? देखिए, टेक्स्ट बुक्स चाहे वो स्कूल के हों चाहे वो यूनिवर्सिटी के हों, उनकी अपनी सीमाएं हैं। कुछ लेवल तक आपके समाज में जो गैर बराबरियां हैं, जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट, जो इंडियन पॉलिटी है, उसको इवॉल्व करना है। सिर्फ एक टेक्स्ट बुक से, एक टीचर या एक क्लासरूम से वो सारे बैटल्स या वो एक सेंसिटिव नज़रिया पैदा करना नहीं हो सकता है। सो मैनी थिंग्स नीड टू चेंज, बट ऑफ कोर्स नॉलेज एंड एजुकेशन इज़ एन इम्पॉर्टेंट फील्ड विच इज़ वाई दे वॉन्ट टू कंट्रोल इट। और इसलिए मेरे से पहले जो वक्ता बोले उन्होंने कहा था कि जब आप अपनी हिस्ट्री और यूनिवर्सिटी के करिकुलम से ऐसे चीज़ें ड्रॉप कर रहे हैं, जैसे सोशियोलॉजी के एनसीईआरटी बुक से आप कम्युनल राइट्स का, दंगों को ही इफेस करना चाहते हो, तो वो समाज, वो यूथ ऐसी चीज़ें क्यों हो रही हैं, कैसे वो एक्सपीरियंस अनफोल्ड होता है, वो समझ ही नहीं पाएगा, राइट। इनफैक्ट हमारे सोशियोलॉजी की बुक्स को तो हाल फिलहाल का जो दिल्ली में राइट हुआ था 2019-20 को भी एक रेफरेंस पॉइंट बनाना चाहिए था, वो नहीं हुआ ना। सो आई थिंक वी हैव टू सी इट्स अगेन इट्स अ कल्चरल वॉर एंड इट्स अ वॉर बीइंग फॉट ऑन मेनी लेवल्स. One is happening in the education sector and we need to resist accordingly. Thank you.
Just, thank you so much everyone for coming across the city on this day. Just wanted to also record our thanks on behalf of IAFN to Jawahar Bhavan and Rajiv Gandhi Foundation for allowing us to come and debate and dissent in a space, ever shrinking everywhere across the city. Also to thank NewsClick for live streaming today's program and taking it to the outside world for all those who couldn't come. We hope to see many more of you as part of our network and more participation. Like Professor Deshpande said, this is only the beginning. So yes, please join us for tea outside. Thanks.